Good day, everyone. My name is Hallie Preskill. I'm a Managing Director with FSG based in our Seattle office, and I'm co-author of the paper, Building a Strategic Learning and Evaluation System for Your Organization. I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar called Connecting Strategy, Evaluation, and Learning in Your Organization. We have a really terrific program for you, but before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. We have reserved time for questions and answers at the end of our program, but please feel free to submit questions to the speakers at any time during the presentation by typing a question into the Ask a Question box in the lower left portion of your screen. If you have any technical questions or concerns, you may also submit these questions via the Ask a Question box on your screen. Our technical partner will do their best to address your concerns. And finally, during today's presentation, your slides will be automatically synchronized with the audio, so you do not need to flip your slides to follow along. Let's take a quick look at today's agenda. In addition to providing an overview of a strategic learning and evaluation system, our presenters will be describing their efforts to create and sustain learning and evaluation systems in their own organizations. They won't, however, have the time, unfortunately, to get into great levels of detail about specific evaluation approaches, methods, or metrics. However, they've each offered to follow up with any of you who want to contact them after the webinar. First, we'll be hearing from Caitlin Mack, a Senior Consultant at FSG, who will provide an overview of what is a strategic learning and evaluation system. And then we'll hear from our three panelists, Rebecca Levin from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, Brenda Solorzano from Blue Shield of California Foundation, and Medina from the Oak Foundation. As I said, we have left time at the end for questions and answers, and I'll have the pleasure of moderating the questions and answers with each of our panelists at the end of our session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Caitlin Mack from FSG. Caitlin?
Thank you, Hallie. So one of the most common frustrations that I hear in my work is that evaluation isn't having an impact on how people design or implement their strategies. We've discovered that there's often a disconnect between evaluation, strategy, and learning within organizations. Today I'm going to share with you one way to address this disconnect and connect the dots between these various activities to create a more cohesive evaluation practice. Many of your organizations are probably already investing valuable time and resources into designing and improving your program strategies. And probably everyone is collecting data and information in some way to communicate how you're doing to your donors or to your board. So developing a more cohesive approach, a strategy for your evaluation work, usually doesn't require starting from scratch. Yet for most people, it often isn't clear how these different activities work together to form a cohesive whole. Next, please. We are excited to be sharing with you today a framework that helps fill in the blanks and create a holistic evaluation strategy. We can assess the quality and focus of activities already in place and identify what might be missing. And by aligning these activities around strategy, evaluation, and learning, we find that evaluation practice becomes more deliberate, that resources are better used, and that your organizations have the information that you need to make better strategic decisions. Next slide, please. We have called this framework a strategic learning and evaluation system. A strategic learning and evaluation system can help reinforce the interconnectedness between strategy and evaluation. We believe that evaluation is at its best when it informs and is guided by the strategies of your organization. A strategic learning and evaluation system actually helps to understand and describe what will be evaluated, when, by, and with whom, and it lays out the resources that are needed to make it happen. Next slide, please. So what is a strategic learning and evaluation system? A system includes 4 essential components that we call pillars. And while each of these pillars and component parts associated with them are important, we have found that cultivating a culture of learning is essential. And some of our panelists will talk in more depth about what that looks like. And so today, rather than going one by one through each of these components, which you can find more detail on in our guide on the fsg.org website, I'd like to spend just a couple minutes highlighting a few aspects of a system that are worth noting. First, the evaluation vision pillar in blue. One thing that we found over and over again is that people have different expectations for evaluation depending on where they sit within an organization. Having a clear and commonly understood vision statement creates a common understanding of what the purpose of evaluation is and how it will be used. The strategy pillar clarifies the activities, outcomes, and assumptions of strategy that are most ripe for evaluation and learning. One of the most valuable products of a strategic learning and evaluation system are its strategic evaluation questions. Without these questions, what we tend to see is a scattershot approach to evaluation. Staff are sometimes scrambling to address ad hoc requests from a CEO or board, and this can make it difficult to answer some of the larger strategic questions that leaders might have. So having well-formed and thought-out strategic evaluation questions help people decide how to focus their monitoring and evaluation activities on what really matters most. The monitoring and evaluation pillar increases clarity and direction about what gets evaluated, and it uses the strategic learning questions as a guide. It often includes criteria so that program staff can tailor their evaluation activities to meet their own information needs. Lastly, the environment pillar really is about the infrastructure that's needed to support learning and evaluation within an organization. We found that learning and evaluation can't be seen as the responsibility of just one or two people. So the system helps think through the role of all staff in carrying out the evaluation vision of the organization. With these components in place, we believe that a strategic learning and evaluation system helps to ensure that your learning and evaluation activities will result in meaningful and actionable information, which will help your organization achieve its goals. Hallie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. That was a really great way to set the context and of an overview of a strategic learning and evaluation system. And it'll be really interesting now to hear from our three panelists about how they've been designing and implementing their own strategic learning and evaluation systems. So our first panelist, or our next panelist, I should say, is Rebecca Levin from the McCormick Foundation, and she is Director of Evaluation and Learning there. Rebecca?
Thanks, Hallie. I came to the McCormick Foundation 3 years ago, and my marching orders were go. The foundation had worked with FSG and had a vague notion that evaluation should be an important driver in the work that we do here, but there was not a sense of what does that mean, what does that entail. I had directed an evaluation and research organization, and I knew the power of evaluation as a tool for understanding and making change. So my goals at the foundation were to, first of all, create systems to routinize the use of evaluation, to help staff develop what I call evaluation heads. It's not just a matter of doing an evaluation or doing a series of evaluations or evaluating a particular strategy, but helping them approach their work with an evaluative stance, asking questions and looking for ways to answer them. And then the third part was to create systems to ensure the application of knowledge. My title when I was hired was the Director of Evaluation and Learning, and I thought it was redundant. I thought, why would you say and learning? With good evaluation practice, you always have learning. But I found that it ended up being really a necessary piece to state that out loud, to build it into the system. My experience with our staff is that the time demands to process grant proposals and grants ends up trumping the necessary time to figure out how do you apply this learning to your own work. And so unless we specifically say this is about evaluation and learning, this work that we're doing is about doing evaluation and applying it to the work that we're doing going forward, it doesn't happen. Next slide, please. So what is going well? First of all, the 4 pillars that were described on Caitlin's last slide on evaluation vision, strategy, and focus, and so on, are going well. And I'd just like to say in the side that I want to recommend that folks read through the whole paper that Caitlin and Hallie wrote about this topic. It is one of the best current resources that I've seen, and I've been reading everything I can find. So I highly recommend that people look at that. The work within each program area is going well. It's far more strategic than it was 3 years ago, but I will say that there is considerable variation in sophistication of strategic use of evaluation across the program areas. And that leads to my next piece, which is that you have to think of this as an organic process. If you try to come into an organization and implement a canned process, it will not work. It has to be something that grows within the organization, and that means growing within each program area, growing within each individual, and you need to give the time for that to happen, which leads into the next point, the slowing down, the push for a quick creation. My CEO and colleagues really wanted this to happen, and they wanted it to happen quickly, and I understand it. I mean, it sounded like a really good thing, and if I were them, I would have wanted it to happen quickly as well. Part of my job was to put my heels in a bit and say, wait, slow down. It won't happen. It won't be an organic process if we impose a uniform process across the whole foundation. And lastly, the last piece that's going well is this evaluative thinking piece. Our staff are getting the whole notion of evaluation in a way that I had anticipated would take much longer than it has. So that's really very good. And then I guess I would like also to say that we're doing quite a bit of work in addition to work with individual programs, program officers, and program areas. We have evaluation training sessions across the foundation in topics from writing good evaluation RFPs to internal versus external evaluation, et cetera. But we still have significant amount of work to do on creating a culture that supports the learning. And I identified 3 pieces of it. It's really a complex process. So the first part that I identified is making the hierarchy more porous. We need to increase here the opportunities for input and feedback at as many parts of the grant making and strategy design and implementation and evaluation points as is possible. And then secondly, when feedback is given, people need to be open to hearing it, whether or not they agree or disagree, and reward people for speaking up. And then finally, when decisions are made that are having a direct impact on staff, there needs to be as great a level of transparency as is possible. A year and a half ago, I saw significant challenges in our learning culture, but I felt that as an individual voice, my perspective would have only limited influence or power. And so I developed a survey for our staff to create support for change. And you can see the top of the first page on the right side of your screen, but the whole survey is posted on FSG's website. And it was adopted from something that I had found in the literature that seemed to really feed into some of the issues we were struggling with. This survey led to foundation-wide discussions about what was happening here, how to improve what was going on, and how to make the way that we operate the strongest that we could. We created culture subcommittees on supporting open discussion and critical feedback, rewarding experimentation, creating effective channels for flow of learning between levels, and discussing what we called the undiscussables. And it's actually time now for us to re-administer the survey to see the progress and the areas that need more work. Next slide, please. So there are 3 thoughts that I would like to leave with you, and one of them is that in the way that I think of my job as having both a very a direct focus on evaluation as well as this focus on creating a learning culture, you can't do one and finish it and then do the other. These are things that have to happen simultaneously. And I think of it like the work we used to do with youth and self-esteem when I was running a program, that you don't just focus on self-esteem. You're working on the content or the context of your activities with them, and as part of that, the work on self-esteem grows. When we work on culture, we are doing it as we work on evaluation and the other components of philanthropy. The second piece is that this is either going to be an organic process or it becomes veneer and a matter of compliance rather than becoming part of what I think of as the organization's DNA. And DNA takes a long time to change, and you have to be patient with it. which leads to my last point, which is these processes require humility, tenacity, tremendous patience, and love. And what I want to tell you is that this is not my kumbaya moment. I am not doing this for any reason other than to raise a red flag for you. This is very difficult work, and if you're lucky, it looks something like the stock market trajectory, increasing in worth over time, but there are many ups and downs, and you have to have the flexibility to move with them and come back at it again. So that's it for me, Hallie, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I have to say three things that just stood out for me that made me smile, and was that I loved when you said that evaluation and learning are redundant. I think that's a brilliant comment, and I love it. The other is this organic process, meaning it's emergent. It's going to take time. It's going to, change and evolve and grow. And as you said, things that go well and then some setbacks along the way. So it does take that persistence and a lot of stamina, I suppose. And then there's another evaluative thinking being built into the DNA of the organization. So thank you. Those are all wonderful thoughts for us, and it's great to hear about your experience. I know the questions are coming up about some of the details, so hopefully get to those in the Q&A. I did want to refer to, Rebecca, the survey that you've noted is on our website. I will be giving the website address later, and some of you have asked about the paper that was referred to as well, the Building a Learning and Evaluation System for Your Organization, that is also on our FSG website. And I will give the exact website address later for those of you who want to get some of these additional resources that are being referred to. So now our next panelist is Brenda Solorzano, who's the Chief Program Director at Blue Shield of California Foundation. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you, Hallie. Hello, all. As Chief Program Director at the Blue Shield of California Foundation, I oversee all program grant-making and learning work. We're a statewide foundation with program areas focused on healthcare and domestic violence issues, and we have an annual grant-making budget of about $30 million a year. And we dedicate about 10% historically of our annual budget to evaluation and learning activities. When we first started thinking about doing this SLUS, there were a couple of reasons why it made sense for us. Like many foundations, we were interested in being able to tell the story of our impact that the investments we were making were having in the communities we care about. And we weren't really having a good way of being able to tell that story. Second, although we evaluated many of our large projects and initiatives, much of our evaluation efforts were ad hoc and weren't tied to any specific learning questions, agendas, or specific outcomes that we were interested in tracking. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, we wanted to become a more intentional learning organization. And our board at one point asked us, what are you, a dumb organization? And now you want to become a learning organization. And we said, no, we are a learning organization, but we haven't done it in a very institutionalized manner. And in order to make smarter decisions, we need to have better information that will inform better decision-making that will hopefully lead to greater impact. Next slide. Our desire to become a learning organization started almost 4 years ago. When we first started out, it was really an ad hoc process that I stumbled through. Eventually, I ran into the idea of the SLUS, working with the FSG group, and we decided that we were going to move forward on implementing a SLUS at our organization. And I can tell you that our process has been a mixed bag that has led to some forward movement on some areas, some need to pause and reset, and some need to even restart from scratch on key elements of the SLUS. So let me first share with you some successes in areas that we are still working on in regards to our SLUS work. When we started the SLUS, FSG staff made it clear that we needed to have a clear strategic plan that would help inform and drive our evaluation and learning work. We were also told that having a simple and clear vision for evaluation and learning work was necessary. And at the time, I actually thought we had very clear strategic plans for each of our program areas, and that we had a vision for evaluation that was really grounded in our desire to be a learning organization. But FSG staff kept telling me that we did not really have a foundation-wide strategy, nor did we have an articulated vision for our learning and evaluation work. We also did not have specific outcomes that we were trying to get at as part of our strategic plans that we had at the time. Of course, I thought I knew it all, and I didn't necessarily agree with FSG staff's assessment and decided to move forward anyway with implementing the SLUS. And as I moved forward, I learned a couple of things that I think are worth sharing. One is that without an actual strategic plan with agreed upon measures of success that are shared and understood by all staff, and without a clear articulation of why it was we were interested in moving and becoming a learning and evaluation system, there was no way we were going to be able to do this work successfully. So then it required me to actually hit a pause button and sit with our staff and focus on developing a foundation-wide strategic plan with shared outcomes in place that would allow us to have a clear and shared understanding of what it is we were doing and why it was that we were doing that work. So fast forward 2 years later, we now have a foundation-wide logic model with very specific programmatic, operational, and reputational outcomes in place. And each department within the foundation has its own logic model that rolls up into the overarching logic model. This has allowed us to actually be able to move forward because we now finally have that first pillar in place of the SLES. We also have just recently adopted a Learning for Impact set of principles that explains why we do evaluation and learning work at our foundation. With these two key elements of the SLES in place, we are finally now able to be in a place to take the next steps. And these next steps include working on finalizing a set of performance measures that will help frame our learning questions, continuing to build an organizational culture that is focused on learning, and addressing the shortfalls that we've identified in our staffing and systems that have prevented us from becoming a true learning organization. And I want to just touch briefly on this question or issue of culture. At the foundation, our CEO and our senior leadership, myself included, were very supportive of doing this learning work. We also did a very good job of bringing along our board, and we thought that with senior leadership and our board on board with what we were doing, that we had everything we needed to move forward. But we learned that what we did not do was bring along our staff, and our program staff in particular. At the time that we started the SLES work, our program staff was stretched pretty thin, and this work felt like it was going to be an add-on. Many of them already had evaluation activities going on, and it was not clear to them why anything else more or different was needed. And we also had a culture at the foundation of what I would call perfection, and a culture where failure was not perceived to be allowable. So when we started doing the early learning work, it was no wonder that I ran into a stone wall. In that type of environment, there was no time, openness, or perceived value in having learning conversations. And the key lesson for me was that I needed to pay more attention to the change management efforts needed to become an intentional learning organization. I think we've made progress on this front, but it's still something that we're working on today. Next slide, please. This leads me to the main message that I would share with you, and that is that becoming a learning organization is a process. And even with a SLES, it does not happen overnight. I'm entering my 4th year of doing this work, and only recently have I started to feel that we're finally on a path forward. And some key reflections that I'll share with you if you are interested in thinking about doing the SLES. The first is do not underestimate the need to have all the elements of a SLES in place. As we learned, not having key strategic questions in place and having an overarching strategic plan really caused us to slow down in the process of moving forward with becoming a learning organization. The second point for you is that this work takes time and iteration. So don't underestimate how much time it's going to take for you to get to where you think you need to be in order to become a true learning organization. Also, pay attention to the need to build a culture of learning and make sure that you bring everyone along, especially program staff. Also, having a shared understanding of what success will look like when you think about the outcomes that you're trying to get to as an organization and how you will measure whether or not you're having progress towards that is going to be essential and really the framework upon which you can build your learning questions. And finally, the journey, the process of implementing a LES is really a journey. It's not the tool, it's not the SLES that is actually going to be what makes you a learning organization. It's the process that you go through and the opportunity that as an organization you will have to actually learn from each other and learn together and be able to share those learnings within your organization with your grantees and with key stakeholders.
Hallie, back to you.
Thank you, Brenda. So 3 things that stood out for me. Looks like today's my 3 things. First, I love how you started with talking about how SLAS helps tell a story. I think a lot of organizations are looking for ways to tell their story through data, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, and SLAS helps you develop those stories, so that's terrific. The other one was the importance of having a clear strategy to ground and orient a strategic learning and evaluation system. I think that's a really helpful point to make. And the third, I think both you and Rebecca so far have really emphasized the link and the relationship between evaluation and organizational learning, that evaluation is really a catalyst for organizational learning, and that they're either 2 sides of the coin or interrelated, or however you might talk about it. So thank you. Those are really great insights, and really appreciate the presentation. Our third panelist today is Medina, and Medina is a program associate with the Issues Affecting Women program at the Oak Foundation. Medina, over to you.
Thank you, Hallie. So yes, I work with the Issues Affecting Women program. The Oak Foundation is a family foundation. We're actually based in Geneva, Switzerland. And our program focuses specifically on women's rights in the area of violence and movement building. This year we had a grant-making budget of $12.2 million. And we have 4 staff members. And actually in the foundation we don't have any dedicated staff or budget for monitoring and evaluation, so it's expected that this work would be integrated into the program work. In 2011, our program developed our first ever strategic plan, and once we had it in hand, we actually realized that we didn't have a plan for how to implement it or make it operational. And that's when we kind of stumbled across the SLAS, and it really resonated for us as a logical way to build a sort of roadmap to guide our implementation of our strategy. What appealed to us was the idea of approaching our strategy as a learning opportunity and adopting an approach that would be flexible and adaptive. So that instead of waiting 5 years for formal review, we could actually define and test assumptions as we went and make changes to our strategy on an ongoing basis. It was also important for us to be respectful of our grantees and to find ways to ensure their participation and feedback into our strategy. Next slide, please. So in terms of what's going well, for the past 2 years we have had a learning summit on an annual basis, which is basically 2 to 3 days where we sit together as a team and reflect on what we've learned over the year. And in addition to our internal learning, we also try to aggregate all the feedback we've received from our grantees during the year on our learning and evaluation questions to really take stock of what we've learned and how we should be adapting our strategy. This has been really valuable because in the past we hadn't really ever given ourselves the time to do this type of reflection, and we're quite surprised actually at all the learning that we do over the year and how even in the course of 1 or 2 years our strategy has really benefited and evolved from that reflection process. Last year, we synthesized this learning into an update, a sort of state of learning report, and we also updated our learning and evaluation questions to reflect what we had already learned, which often just created new questions that we realized we needed to answer. The update was also our chance to feed our learning back to our grantees, to appreciate and validate their contributions. And it was also an opportunity for us to share what we've learned with the field so that our learning doesn't stay with us but can actually inform the women's rights and philanthropic fields more broadly. So I would say in terms of what's going well, that's something that we've really benefited from. Areas that we're still working on is one, that we are actually the only program at the Oak Foundation that has adopted the SLES as such, and because of that it hasn't really been integrated into our forms and processes and still remains kind of an add-on, which creates more work for us and creates more work for our grantees. We're also still working on developing an evaluation methodology for tracking global outcomes and impacts. especially amongst clusters of grants, which is how we tend to do our grant making. At present, most of our evaluation work is done at the individual grant level, but our strategy is based on clusters of grants at either a thematic or geographical level, or both. And so having an approach that would allow us to really think about measuring out impact and looking at clusters of grants would be really, really helpful. Next slide, please. Based on our experience, I think it's really important to integrate a learning frame into the strategic planning process from the start. We didn't know about the SLES when we did our initial strategic planning, so I would say that our initial strategy was somehow learning blind. But once we decided to build an SLES, we really committed to the process, and we were very lucky to have a lot of support from the president of our foundation, who really believes in taking a learning approach. She's also encouraged us to share our experience with other programs in the foundation to encourage them to integrate a learning lens into their work as well. Whereas we've opted for what I would call maybe a Cadillac approach, I think it's also possible to think about a smart car version of the SLES, or of learning, when time and or resources are scarce. And for me, what that would mean is taking some of the big ideas behind the SLES and adapting them or integrating them into your own strategic frame. And that might be as simple as identifying some learning questions that you want to answer in a given year in one or two areas of work and building from there. I also think it's really useful, as I mentioned before, to harmonize internal forms and processes with a learning approach so that it becomes a natural and habitual part of your monitoring work, rather than being one more thing that you might very well forget to ask or send your grantees. And I'll just end with saying that for us, one of the most important changes to the way that we do our work has really been that built-in time and space for reflection on what we're learning, both individually as a team, but also at a program level. And I can say that in the beginning this felt a little bit forced the first time we did it, but now it's something that I really look forward to, and it's something that I try to integrate into the various aspects of my work and into the documents that I produce during the year, be it a trip report, a recommendation, or a progress report, because I know that when it comes time for our Learning Summit, we will need to have access to all of that learning in order to really reflect and see how we can, how the SLES process can shape our strategy moving forward. So I will turn it back to Hallie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Medina. So a few of the things I heard that stood out from your presentation was I loved how you talked about the SLES being a roadmap for implementing the strategy, and that it enabled you to test assumptions of the strategy and to adjust as you were learning along the way. So I think that's a great metaphor, thinking of the SLES as a roadmap. The other one that, another piece that you mentioned that is around grantees. And I think that's I'm really glad you highlighted the role of grantees in either developing and or implementing aspects of the strategic learning evaluation system. We have seen that several organizations are really asking the grantees, what questions matter and what outcomes are possible to be more partners in the evaluation and learning endeavor. So thank you for highlighting that. And then the third piece, I just loved your metaphor of the smart car version versus the Cadillac, or today probably the Lexus or whatever. But the notion of, especially for organizations that don't have a lot of capacity in terms of resources, time, or personnel, that you don't have to bite off a whole SLES to make a difference. To start small and maybe with integrating, as you said, some learning questions and build from there. So to take small steps, but to go on that path to start that journey. So very much appreciate your pointing that out as well. Well, folks, on the webinar, we are grateful to our panelists for each of the four of them for actually sticking to their time. And as a result, we actually have a good amount of time for questions and answers. So we're thrilled about that. And many of you have been submitting questions along the way. And my colleague Lauren Smith has been our question wrangler and has been identifying those questions where there's a lot of interest and in terms of patterns and consistency. But I think one of the questions that a lot of people have been asking about, and this is for any of you on the panel, how have you built buy-in and ownership for the SLUS among the staff? And each of you have touched on this a teeny bit, but Rebecca, if we could start with you, how have you been building that buy-in? And what tactics or strategies have you been using to do that?
Right. So when I first came here, I spent the morning with the entire staff talking to them about my perspective on evaluation and why I see it as powerful as it is and my vision for how I can see it being used here at the foundation. And then after that overall presentation, I started working individually with each of the program areas and then with each of the program officers within each of the program areas to understand what it is that they believed they were doing, what it is that they believed they were gaining out of any data collection that was going on. There wasn't a lot of evaluation going on initially, but it was more a data collection. And then coming up with ideas about how to make that process a more strategic process. And we started small. My thought is always start with really small wins, and then after that you can build it into something larger, which takes more time, more effort, more risk, but ends up having a greater impact on the individual programs or the folks working within them.
Great, thank you. Medina or Brenda, do you want to address that question?
This is Brenda. One of the things that I've done is turned it back to the program staff and asked them, what is it that you need to make better decisions about the work that you're doing? And help me figure out what are the questions you're asking yourself or the information you think you'll need to have in order to make future decisions. And when it becomes something that is going to be helpful to them, I've seen them really come on board. The other piece that I've done is engaging them in doing the work. I think when I first started, I took this responsibility upon myself and felt like I had to do the heavy lifting. I've now flipped that, and now I am facilitating the learning and really letting them be engaged in driving the work. And that engagement actually has built a lot of buy-in from program staff.
Great, thank you. Medina, any thoughts on this question?
I think I have maybe a different perspective from the other panelists because I am program staff, and this was really a process that was driven by us as a program. And so if we didn't buy into it, it wouldn't go anywhere. And we really saw the value of it because we wanted our strategy to matter and to be kind of live and real. And so we've integrated the SLUS into how we do our grant making so that with every grant and every progress report that we process, we link it with specific outcomes and specific learning questions that would be associated with that grant. And that's really helped us to, again, make it much more of a habit than something additional. And as we've gone along the way, we're starting to see how the learning is building on itself and how we are really starting to see where there are gaps. So it's kind of an exciting process for us, and it also takes some of the mystery out of grant making because you realize that when you have a question, it's likely a question that exists in the field more broadly. And so if you can go to the experts, which are our grantees, and get their feedback and their input, they really let you know if you're on the right path or if you've made the right assumptions. And so some of the assumptions that we made early on have really borne fruit, and now they're kind of no longer assumptions, but stated, facts within our strategy because we now have an evidence base to show that that assumption was valid. So I think for us, it's really been it has a clear value added to our work, and that's where our buy-in comes in.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question is for Brenda. And Brenda, the question is, how did the Blue Shield of California Foundation program staff shake the perceived expectation of perfection and become comfortable with learning through failures as well as successes?
So I would say that we are still on that path. I don't know that we've totally gotten there, but some of the things that we've done that have helped are the following. First of all, we have now put on all of our agendas an agenda item called Fabulous Flops. where we ask people to actually share based on the work that they're doing, things that haven't worked really well, why they haven't worked really well, and what they have learned from them. And have engaged in that exercise at every program meeting that we have, as well as our all-staff meeting. And related to that is we started to recognize that perception of perfection came from the top, and there was a sense that myself as Chief Program Director as well as the CEO had pretty high expectations, and that it was not okay to fail. And what we started to do, both he and myself, was to put ourselves out front center and sharing our fabulous flops and letting other folks see that it was okay to fail. And that the most important thing was that you could use that opportunity of failure to learn and to share those lessons with each other so that we could be better together. And I think modeling that in the Fabulous FOPS conversations has helped the team feel like it's okay. And the last thing I'll say is we've also stressed that there is a difference between learning for accountability versus learning for impact. And structuring that conversation that way has helped people understand that if we're learning for impact, it's going to be okay when we fail, because we're going to take lessons out of that as well.
Great. Thank you, Brenda, very much. The next question I will pose to any of you on the panel: is there a way to measure an organization's preparedness to develop a strategic learning evaluation system? And I might ask Caitlin if she has some thoughts on this. Put you on the spot, Caitlin. But we'd love to hear from any of the other panelists, too.
Sure. I'll start out, I think, reflecting on a couple of the things that the panelists have already highlighted. One is, you need supportive champions for this within an organization. It may start out as one person or a small team, as in the case of the Oak Foundation, or it might be something that CEOs and other leadership within an organization are really excited about. So I think that's important. Also, Brenda talked about having a strategy from the outset and having a well-articulated organization-wide strategy. We have a couple examples today of a strategic learning evaluation system being applied either at a programmatic level or an organization-wide level. So at whichever level you're kind of operating at and trying to develop some of these processes and structures to facilitate learning and evaluation, it's important that people have a common understanding of what the goals are that they're trying to achieve through their work in order to be able to create that kind of cohesive set of strategic learning or evaluation questions that will help guide the activities that they continue to invest in. So those are things that definitely come to mind for me.
Hallie, this is Brenda. If I can jump in here, one of the things that we did was the role survey, Readiness for Organizational Learning and Evaluation. And this survey that we gave to our staff gave us a lot of information about where we were as an organization and whether or not we were going to be ready to move forward. And I think this particular tool highlighted for us the culture challenges that we were facing and was instrumental in helping us really slow down and rethink how to do staff engagement given the findings that came out of the role survey.
Great, thank you. And for those of you listening, the role survey is on our website, the FSG website as well. Thanks. Any other thoughts about measuring an organization's or preparedness to develop a SLES, assessing, measuring their readiness essentially for a SLES? No? Okay. Well, let's go on to the next question because there are bunches of them coming in. And, oh, shoot, I just lost that question. There we go. So, Medina, people were very interested about this learning summit that you referred to. Can you say a little bit more about what this looks like, the process, how long, the agenda, what people do?
Yeah, maybe the use of the word summit makes it sound a lot more formal than it actually is. But it's basically a time that we set aside every year. So far it's been in August because that's when we have kind of a small lull in our workload, and it's, I think last year it was 3 days where we just sat together as a team. The first day it was literally just our team members going through our learning and evaluation questions and seeing what we had learned, in each of those areas. And our learning questions are linked to our strategy. So we have program level questions that are for us, and then we have questions that are linked to the different program areas within our strategy. So we just went through those and brainstormed our learning. And then we actually had the summit as a facilitated process. FSG facilitated it for us. So we sent our preliminary learning to them and also the aggregated learning from our grantees. And then we had a 2-day process where we kind of went through that and interpreted what that meant for our strategy, interpreted what that meant for our future learning. And then that was all kind of turned into what we call the update from our strategic learning and evaluation system. So it wasn't a super formal process, but it was just literally giving ourselves some time to think about what we had learned and to share that with each other and to capture it in some meaningful way that we could then feed back to our grantees and to the field more broadly.
Great. Thank you very much. It's really helpful. A question that a variety of people have asked about in different ways has to do with the L word, leadership. And you've each talked about it in a slightly different way, but one question someone is asking is, how do you help leadership support diverting resources to technology and IT enhancements for evaluation? And I would actually like to broaden that question, include that, but broaden it to how do you get leadership to commit to learning, to understanding evaluation as a means for learning, and then, therefore, instead of diverting, perhaps allocating resources to the variety of things that a SLUS needs to be viable and sustainable. I'd like to open that up to anyone on the panel. Just say your name before you speak.
This is Rebecca. I think that in our case, our leadership has been open to it and has embraced it because of what they anticipate is going to be the bang for their buck. I mean, it's always an issue of resources or time or focus. And if you take it for one thing, you're taking it away from another. And so my role then is to say, let's put it into this, and this is what we'll get back from it as a result of it. And again, you start small, but if people can see that it really was worth that kind of time or that kind of resource, there's a greater willingness to try it again the next time.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. Anyone else like to comment on the leadership?
This is Medina. I think for us, it's similar to what Rebecca mentioned, which is that we kind of piloted this for the foundation, and part of what we're doing now is sharing our learning in terms of the process with other colleagues in other programs. And so I can give you a specific example of what a smart car approach would look like, which is I participated in a retreat that one of the other programs had where they were sharing their strategy and kind of doing this brainstorming, this reflection exercise. And I just kept asking them some questions. And every time they would ask a question, I would say, oh, but if you make that a learning question and feed it back to your grantees, I bet in a year you would have the answer to that question. And so, it can be as simple as just thinking about what are your questions and thinking about how you can integrate that into your daily work. And so I think for us, the expectation was this was an investment that the foundation was making with the expectation that we would then share that learning and disseminate that culture across the foundation.
Great. Thanks, Medina. All right, well, let's go on to another question. And again, participants in this webinar, thank you so much for asking these wonderful questions. They're very provocative and thoughtful. This next one has to do with the application of learning from a SLUS. And the question goes, what have any of the organizations changed or done differently as a result of learnings from a strategic learning and evaluation system? For example, did it make selling the recommended changes easier because of evidence and learning that was generated by the system? Anyone want to try that one out? So what difference does this SLES make, or what is it making?
Well, this is Rebecca. I can give you an example of an impact within one program area. One of our program areas had been carrying out their work in a particular, with using a particular approach for quite a while. And as a result of using evaluation to inform what was going on, they made a major shift in their approach to their work and have continued to collect data in order to look at the impact that they were having. So I think that this idea of becoming an organization which is being driven by, which is being informed by evaluation and learning to determine how do we go forward, rather than either what just feels right to us because we've been doing it for a long time, or what the rest of the field is doing, seems to be a major impact that we've had here.
This is Brenda. I can't give a specific example of something programmatically that has changed yet, but what I can share is that having the SLES has changed the kinds of questions that are being raised by program staff and making them think differently about things that they are working on. So, for example, we've been running leadership programs and providing core general operating support to our grantees. And now that we have specific learning questions that we've been posing in those specific areas, we're asking ourselves, what's the future of our investments in these two areas, and might they look differently? And I think that without the SLES, we might just have continued to do the same work that we've been doing in the same way. And now we're having program staff think about things in a very different manner.
Great, thank you. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit. And a lot of people have been asking about this idea of learning questions. And the questions are slightly different, but one person asked, for example, what type of learning questions what types of questions do you ask when you're evaluating a SLES? And then another one says, what are your learning questions? So we have a lot of questions about questions, and maybe some of you could pick one of the other questions. So let me rephrase. What type of questions do you ask when you're evaluating your SLES to know whether or not this is going, is it being implemented well? Is it achieving what your goals are? And what do you want to know about it? And then the other question is really the learning questions that are part of a SLES. What are some examples of those?
This is Medina. So I think for us, because we've really just started on this journey, it's a little soon for us to be asking those evaluation questions about the SLES. So I don't have an answer for that. But in terms of the learning questions, we really looked at the questions really come from our strategy, and actually a few of the questions have asked for specific examples, and there's some in the slide, but you can also find both our SLES and the update on our website, or maybe we can even put them on the FSG webinar website. But they really come from organic questions of, what is the best way to reach whatever goal we have to reach, and is this the appropriate way to do that? And then we get feedback from our grantees saying, yes, we did this, and this was the result, and so we think this is the right way. I mean, it's not a super formal process. It's really a very organic way of thinking through how you are developing your strategy, where there are gaps, where you need sort of to have research. So another concrete change that's come out of our SLES is that we've identified areas where we needed to commission research because we recognized that there wasn't enough evidence in the field. And the idea being that once we have that research, we would be able to make much more informed decisions about where we invest our grant-making funds in terms of prevention work, or in terms of service delivery, or in terms of advocacy. So yeah.
Thanks, Medina.
This is Brenda. So I think this is where we realized that we needed to go back and revisit our so-called strategy that we had at the time, because what we did not have in that programmatic strategy at the beginning was a real shared understanding of what organizational outcomes, both programmatically, operationally, and reputationally, we were trying to seek. And without having those outcomes and without having a clear set of specific strategies that we were trying to move, it was hard to understand or develop the learning questions. So now that we've actually gone back and done that work and we have the specific outcomes we're trying to achieve and we have specific strategies that we're using to try to achieve those outcomes, now we can ask some specific learning questions related to that strategic plan. And the questions that we've been focusing on are looking at whether or not we're moving the needles on the programmatic outcomes that we've laid out, as well as asking ourselves whether or not the strategies we have selected and the way that we are implementing them are working. Again, we're early on in this process, so I can't share anything more specific, but at least it's given us the framework to begin to frame the questions that we think we're going to want to ask.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, and I thought maybe, this is Hallie, a good way to end is for each of you, each of our four panelists, to give one piece of advice for any of you on the webinar who are considering either just starting to develop a strategic learning and evaluation system or who have one but are struggling to keep it alive and aloft. So maybe just 10 seconds or 15 seconds per panelist, and we'll go in the order of the presentations. Caitlin, what piece of advice would you give our listeners today?
I would say that first off, it's so important to begin to identify what kinds of questions you really want to ask and want answered through your learning and evaluation activities. As you develop these processes, I just see the strategic learning questions as kind of the core and the center that really helps connect all of the various learning and evaluation activities that you might be doing. So I would say if there's a place to start, that's one place where I would.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caitlin. Rebecca?
I would say to be clear about why it is that you're doing this, that it's going to be uncomfortable and difficult and challenging for everyone at different times, and you have to keep focused on why it is we're doing this in order to justify the challenge.
Wonderful. Thank you. Brenda?
That is a journey. It's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of time and building culture, and so it is not the SLES is not a magic bullet, and being able to be flexible and trying to do little bits of piece of work and incremental work is probably going to be a good approach.
Thank you. And Medina?
I think that it's really helpful to think about learning as a component when you're developing your strategic plan. I think we would have saved a lot of headaches and time if we had thought about learning from the get-go rather than bringing it in after we already had the strategic plan in place.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all to our panelists, and thank you for all joining us today on this webinar. We truly hope you learned something useful and interesting and can go forward in developing strategic learning and evaluation systems in your own organizations. We weren't able to answer all your questions today, but we will post answers on the fsg.org website in the coming weeks, so watch your email for updates. We also have a survey we would really appreciate your completing at the end of this webinar. We take your feedback very seriously and try to integrate that into future webinars. These slides and the resources that have been referred to throughout the webinar are available for download at the website here at www.fsg.org/webinar. And if you'd like to access today's recording, you can go do so by logging on with the information you were provided when registering. So without further ado, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.